March 17th, 1944. Rain hammered the slate roofs of the British Forward Engineering Post near the banks of the River Ems, turning the dirt approaches into a glistening brown paste that sucked at boots and swallowed wagon tracks. Lieutenant Harold Whitmore stood at the edge of the river, shoulders hunched beneath his soaked greatcoat, staring into the churning grey water as if it held the answer to a question no one had asked yet. The wind clawed at his cap, tugging the brim upward, but he didn't move. His mind was somewhere else entirely, on the column of German armour reported just 12 miles east, closing fast, and on the single, devastating fact whispered to him by a scout half an hour earlier. They know about the bridge. The bridge was everything. The old stone span that arched across the Ems had survived air raids, winter storms. Even a panicked demolition attempt by a retreating German sapper unit in '43, but it would not survive the weight of a full armoured column rolling over it now. The British had wired it days ago, ready to blow once their units withdrew to safer ground. But now, with enemy tanks approaching too soon and friendly infantry still scattered on the far side, they couldn't destroy it, not without sacrificing their own. Whitmore had studied dozens of tactical puzzles in his life, but he had never seen one that demanded an answer quite like this. Behind him, Corporal Edwin Burke jogged through the mud, his breath clouding in the cold morning air. "Sir," he called, skidding to a halt beside his commander. "Recon unit just sent another runner. They spotted 2 Panzer IVs leading the column, more armour behind, and—" His words trailed off. Whitmore didn't turn. "And what, Burke?" "They brought bridging gear. They won't wait for us to retreat. If they can't take the stone bridge intact, they'll throw their own pontoons across." Whitmore finally looked at his corporal, the rain dripping from the edges of his cap. "How long until they're here?" 2 hours, maybe less." 2 hours. Whitmore exhaled slowly through his teeth. 2 hours to save a river crossing, protect a withdrawing battalion, and stop a German armoured column from punching straight into the British staging area on the western bank. 2 hours to prevent a catastrophe that would ripple across the entire front. He walked back toward the small shed the engineers had converted into a field repair workshop. The interior smelled of oil, wet wool, and the faint metallic tang of welding residue. Inside, half-assembled pontoon frames, ropes, bolts, and canvas skins lay scattered across tables. Weeks earlier, Whitmore had been tasked with improving British rapid assembly pontoons for emergency crossings. He had studied the German models, especially their heavy-duty river bridging units, and discovered something peculiar, a flaw so deeply embedded in their design philosophy that no one had ever exploited it. Not until now. He leaned over the workbench, unrolling one of the captured German schematics. The rain outside drummed harder, as if pushing him to think faster. Burke hovered behind him. "Sir, the retreating infantry. They're spread thin. Half of them are exhausted. If the Germans cross first—" "They won't," Whitmore said quietly. He traced a line on the blueprint with one finger. "Here," he thought. "This is where they're weakest." German assault pontoons were strong, but only under certain conditions. They relied on controlled tension across the supporting spans. Tension that, if disrupted in the right way, at the right moment, could make the whole structure behave not like a floating bridge, but like a trap. A trap Whitmore had secretly tested 2 weeks earlier. He rolled up the blueprint. "Burke, prep the river team. Tell them to assemble the modified rigs." "The rigs?" Burke blinked. "Sir, we haven't field tested the full deployment yet." "We don't need a full test. We need time, and this buys us time." Burke hesitated, then nodded. "I'll have them ready in 10. As Burke left, Whitmore stepped outside again. Across the river, shadows of retreating British infantry flickered between trees, their movements urgent and uneven. The water roared around broken branches and debris swollen from days of rain, a perfect stage for what he intended to do. Dangerous, yes, but perfect. He walked down to the bank where 3 engineers were dragging long wooden crates into position. Inside were the prototypes, British pontoons Whitmore had fitted with internal ballast sacks and a system of quick-release sluice channels. They weren't meant to support foot traffic. They were meant to behave like ordinary pontoons until a very specific moment, when a German tank rolled onto the enemy's own bridge and shifted the load toward the center. At that moment, the pontoons Whitmore had anchored upstream would release carefully calculated bursts of redirected water pressure that would surge beneath the German span. It wasn't designed to wash the bridge away immediately. That would be predictable, and German engineers were trained to counter-sabotage. It was designed to tilt the pontoons just slightly, 3 to 5 degrees, just enough to alter the center of gravity beneath the panzers. Tank crews trusted their weight, their power. They believed nothing floated beneath them could possibly challenge 60 tons of steel. Whitmore intended to use their confidence against them. Minutes passed. Then a runner arrived, a young private, soaked and panting. "Sir, sound reports say engines coming closer. Heavy ones." "Good." Whitmore didn't look up. "Let them come." The engineers worked furiously, shoving the modified pontoons into the river. Ropes snapped taut, anchors sank into the murky depths. The current seized the frames, tugging them downstream, exactly where Whitmore had planned. He adjusted the angle again and again, checking the bearings through the rain. Then the first tremor rolled across the valley. A deep, sustained rumble, the sound of tank tracks grinding wet earth. Everyone froze. Down the eastern road through the mist, the dark silhouettes of German armour emerged. Panzer IVs, half-tracks, supply trucks, all pushing forward with ruthless precision. The British infantry across the river saw them too. A few men stumbled, but their officers shouted and waved them onward. "Hold," Whitmore murmured. He needed the Germans to commit. He needed them to believe the bridge was still usable. The lead tank slowed at the bridge entrance. A commander leaned out of the turret, inspecting the structure. Whitmore held his breath. Then the German waved his arm. The Panzer rolled forward. Its treads clinked heavily across the wet stone. The sound echoed over the river. Whitmore tracked its movement, not toward his pontoons yet, but toward the center of the span, where the German bridging unit would ultimately try to extend support beams. Behind him, Burke whispered, "Sir, is it time?" "Not yet." Another tank followed. Then another. The bridge groaned, but held. A squad of German engineers scrambled toward the bank, preparing their equipment. They unfurled heavy canvas pontoons, locking them together with metal braces. Their plan was obvious. They would reinforce the bridge and create an extension to move armour across faster. Exactly what Whitmore needed. A panzer idled near the halfway point. Its weight made the bridge dip visibly. On the opposite bank, British infantry broke into a run, desperate to reach safety before the crossing became a battlefield. Whitmore gripped the trigger line. 3 degrees, he thought. That's all we need. Burke watched him. "Sir, they'll see us when it goes. They'll be in the water before they understand what happened." Whitmore counted down silently. 5, 4, 3, 2. The Panzer's engine revved. Whitmore pulled. The river answered instantly. A sharp surge burst from beneath the modified pontoons upstream, funneled by the channels he had carved weeks earlier. Water slammed into the underside of the German span, not enough to shatter it, not yet, but enough to tilt the pontoon system the German engineers were assembling. The first German shouted as the platform lurched. A brace snapped. The Panzer rocked forward. Whitmore heard the grinding shriek of metal over stone. Then the tank's right tread slipped. Only an inch. But an inch was enough. The Panzer tilted, slid sideways, and the river seized its weight. The tank rolled violently, smashing through the partially assembled pontoon frame, plunging into the water with a sound like the sky tearing open. Shouts erupted. The second Panzer tried to reverse, but the shifting span jerked beneath it. The rapid imbalance caused by the water surge and collapsing pontoons sent the second tank skidding. Whitmore didn't blink. The river took that one too. German engineers screamed orders. British infantry on the far bank cheered, the sound swallowed by rain and chaos. Whitmore watched calmly as the river swallowed 2 tanks and crippled the bridge. His trick had worked. The Germans couldn't cross now, not in time. But the battle wasn't finished. Not yet. Not even close. The rain didn't ease after the second Panther disappeared beneath the boiling surface. In fact, it fell harder, as if the sky itself were trying to drown the noise of German shouts, collapsing metal and cascading rubble. Lieutenant Harold Whitmore kept his grip on the trigger line for several seconds longer, ensuring every last sluice chamber released its remaining pressure into the river. Only when the modified pontoons settled into their neutral drift did he allow himself a breath. Burke stood beside him, wide-eyed, soaked and trembling with the knowledge that he had just watched 2 armoured vehicles worth tens of thousands of Reichsmarks succumb to nothing more than water, gravity and ingenuity. "Sir," he breathed, I've never seen anything like it." Whitmore didn't look away from the churning water. "Neither have they." On the far bank, the British infantry pushed faster now, scrambling up the slope toward the wooded cover beyond. Officers barked orders, helping stragglers who slipped in the mud or staggered from exhaustion. The Germans had intended to cut them off. Now the river itself had bought them precious minutes. But minutes weren't enough. A shrill whistle pierced the air. German machine gunners scrambled into position near the eastern road, setting up MG-34s behind sandbags and broken stone. Their commanders were screaming for suppressing fire, not at the retreating infantry, but at the British engineers. Whitmore saw the shift almost immediately. The Germans had realized the pontoons weren't an accident. Someone had manipulated the water, someone had interfered, and someone needed to be eliminated. A burst of gunfire shattered the stones near Whitmore's boots. He ducked, dragging Burke with him behind a stack of crates. Splinters, mud, and shards of wet rope flew across the riverbank. "Get down!" he shouted to the rest of his team. Engineers scrambled behind barrels, overturned benches, anything wooden or metal enough to block bullets. One man dove headfirst into a puddle and rolled behind a crate so muddy he blended into it. MG-34 fire raked the shoreline again, the shattering rhythmic bursts echoing across the river. Whitmore clenched his jaw. He couldn't let the Germans reclaim the crossing, or worse, rebuild it. Burke scanned the chaos. "Sir, if they bring in those engineer trucks from the rear, they'll try another bridge build. They'll do it fast this time, and now they know we interfered." "They'll protect the second attempt more carefully," Whitmore finished. "Exactly." A distant roar interrupted their thoughts. Trucks, heavy ones, were arriving behind the German formation. Whitmore glimpsed the shapes through the sheets of rain. Pontoon carriers, equipment lorries, and, most concerning, a fresh Stu-G3 assault gun rolling into position to fire across the river. "It's about to get worse," Burke muttered. Whitmore's eyes narrowed. The Germans were stubborn, but stubbornness made them predictable. They wanted the river. They wanted this crossing. And they couldn't leave now that they suspected sabotage. Retreating would admit vulnerability. Pride was its own trap. Whitmore intended to spring it. He crawled across the mud to Corporal Graves, one of the most dependable engineers on his team. Graves's face was streaked with grease and mud, but his eyes were sharp. "You still have the second set of modified pontoons?" Whitmore asked. Graves nodded. "Aye, sir. They're rigged, but, sir, using them while the Germans are actively firing?" "Yes," Whitmore said simply. "We need them to commit to a second construction, and when they do, we hit the span from underneath again. Harder this time." Burke overheard. "Sir, the river level's rising. The current's worse than before. If we deploy another set, the surge might not behave how it did earlier." "It doesn't need to behave," Whitmore said. "It just needs to reach them." Gunfire spat across the water again. A British engineer cursed as a bullet grazed his sleeve. Whitmore ignored it. Across the river, German engineers dragged new pontoon frames toward the water. They were moving fast now, shoving the units into position with brutal urgency. Every minute that passed meant fewer British infantry got across safely. Whitmore raised his voice. "Teams 1 and 2, prepare for hand launch. We don't have time to secure them fully. We deploy, adjust for current, and release." Burke blinked. Hand launch? Sir, we'll be exposed. No more than we are now, Whitmore said, rising into a crouch. On my mark. He sprinted toward the riverbank, dodging another burst of MG fire. He slid behind a crumbled section of wall, his fingers closing around the ropes of the second modified pontoon system, lighter, smaller, but capable of delivering a concentrated surge if timed correctly. German shouts grew louder. The WWII adjusted its angle. The barrel rising slightly, preparing a shot meant not for infantry, but for the riverbank itself. Whitmore didn't wait. He stood, pulled hard, and gave the signal. In the water! Now! 4 engineers surged forward, running the rope lines along the bank and shoving the pontoons into the boiling river. The current seized them violently, pulling them downstream so quickly that Burke nearly lost his footing trying to redirect the trailing rope. Graves anchored his boots and braced against a boulder, shouting instructions over the storm. The Germans saw the movement instantly. Machine guns pivoted, bullets ripped into the water, kicking up tall geysers. One struck the pontoon frame, punching through the canvas skin and sending a spray of white fibers into the air. Keep going, Whitmore shouted. The pontoons drifted into position, jostling, turning, but holding roughly where the current allowed. Whitmore recalculated the angle on instinct, his pencil-sketched estimates from earlier now useless under fire. Graves yelled, "We're too far downstream." Whitmore's mind ran faster than the river. Too far downstream meant the surge would hit the German span at the wrong angle, harmlessly, even wastefully. They needed the pontoons at a very specific point. "Burke," Whitmore shouted, "we need drag. Cut the upstream rope by 10 feet. Burke stared at him as if he'd gone mad. "Sir, that will pull them straight into the exact position we need," Whitmore finished. "Do it." Burke didn't hesitate again. He drew his knife and slashed the rope. The effect was immediate. The pontoons jerked violently upstream, pivoting as the current seized their new equilibrium point. They drifted inward, toward the very center of the river flow, and then they lined up, perfectly. Whitmore nodded once. "Ready the trigger." Graves braced himself on the bank. Burke held his breath. The Germans continued assembling their second bridge attempt, unaware that the river was again weaponized beneath them. Then the WWII fired. The round smashed into the British shoreline with a thunderous crack, disintegrating stone and earth. A shockwave threw 2 engineers backward. A plume of mud and debris showered Whitmore, but he did not flinch. He yanked the trigger line. The pontoons released. Not a gentle surge this time, but a violent, concentrated pulse of redirected current that roared beneath the German bridging site like a submerged beast awakening. The water struck the pontoon assembly from below, flipping one unit, buckling another, and slamming a third directly into the feet of 2 German engineers, knocking them into the river. Then the partially built span folded. It didn't break all at once. It twisted first, the frames contorting, canvas tearing. A timber brace snapped like a bone. The entire structure lurched sideways as the water forced the pontoons into a steep, unnatural angle. The WWII's crew saw it too late. The assault gun began reversing, but the rising water pressure struck again, overturning another brace and sending the entire half-built platform collapsing beneath its own weight. German engineers shouted, scrambling backward. Then the river consumed the bridge. Frames tumbled, tools vanished. A pontoon inflated with enemy markings spun down the current like a broken toy. Whitmore felt the impact of the destruction rather than saw it. The surge washed against the British bank a second later, heavy but weakened. Graves steadied himself. Burke exhaled shakily. Across the river, the German armoured column halted for the first time since dawn. Officers gathered in a huddle, arguing furiously, pointing at the wreckage and the swirling water. The WWII idled, unsure whether to fire again or retreat. Whitmore wiped rain from his eyes. "They'll try again," he murmured, "but not the same way." Burke looked at him. "Sir, what happens if they bring artillery, or heavier armour, or wait for backup?" Whitmore's expression hardened. "Then we force the river to fight harder." He didn't know yet how he would do it. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. The Germans would not cross here today. And the river, for all its violence, had more to give, much more. The river grew louder as the afternoon pressed on, swollen by relentless rain and the wreckage now tangled beneath its surface. Its colour had shifted from a muddy brown to a darker, angrier shade, streaked with foam and bits of German pontoon debris drifting aimlessly downstream. Lieutenant Harold Whitmore knelt at the water's edge, his hands still trembling slightly from the recoil of the last surge, though he would never admit it aloud. Engineers around him caught their breath in ragged bursts, faces smeared with mud and oil, uniforms soaked through. But the crossing in front of them, still intact, still unbroken, remained on their side. For now. A low, grinding rumble echoed from the eastern road again. Not the steady pulse of tank engines, but the deeper, heavier growl of something larger. Whitmore stiffened. Even through the storm's howl, he recognized the sound. Burke swallowed. "Sir, that's a Panther." The silhouette emerged moments later, sleek, angular, unmistakably deadly. Its turret swept slowly, scanning the riverbank, gathering information the WWII could not. Behind it, infantry fanned out in staggered lines, rifles at the ready, helmets dripping with rain. These soldiers weren't moving with the rushed desperation of the earlier engineers. They moved with precision. The Germans had cast aside the idea of a hasty crossing. Now they were committing a full armoured assault element to reclaim the river. Whitmore rose to his feet. His soaked boots squelched in the mud. "Graves, tell me we still have the deep anchors." Graves checked the crates behind him. "3 left, sir. But those were meant for stabilising bridge foundations, not... We'll use them to guide the current." Burke blinked. "Guide the current? Sir, the river's already in flood stage." "That's what makes it possible," Whitmore said, already walking toward the crates. "Floodwaters carry weight. Weight carries force. If we can redirect even a fraction of that force, we can turn the entire river into a moving wall." Graves muttered, "A moving wall, he says." But he obeyed without hesitation. The Panther stopped at the eastern approach. Its turret paused, aimed not at the bridge, but at the engineer's shoreline. Whitmore knew it was searching for him, searching for the saboteur whose tricks had twice destroyed German bridging attempts. The tank crew would not fire blindly. Panthers were valuable. They would gather intelligence first, determine the safest crossing point, and then eliminate the threat. Whitmore grabbed one of the heavy anchors, a metal spike the length of his forearm with a weighted, ridged head. Designed to hold against torrential shifts in riverbeds, the anchor could withstand enormous pressure. But Whitmore wasn't interested in stabilizing anything. He was interested in destabilizing everything. As the engineers hauled the anchors to the water's edge, Burke crouched beside Whitmore. "Sir, if we misjudge this, the river could surge toward our own bank." Whitmore nodded. "I know. Could take out our position." "I know. Could take us out too." "I know, Burke." Burke stared at him. "Sir, I just needed to be sure you knew." Whitmore's lips twitched slightly, the closest thing to humour he had left. "Help me with the first anchor." They waded into the shallows, water slapping against their shins. Whitmore positioned the anchor at a slanted angle, driving it deep into the submerged mud with a mallet. Burke held steady as the river pulled against his legs with increasing fury. The second anchor went in farther downstream, the third at a distance that made Graves shout just to be heard. The configuration wasn't random. Whitmore angled each one to create a narrow, invisible funnel beneath the surface, an artificial corridor for the floodwater. If the river followed the path he intended, it would accelerate at a dangerous rate, concentrating pressure along a single undercurrent, a weaponized undercurrent. The Germans still had no idea what he was doing. Infantry set up firing lines. The Panther rolled slightly forward, treads grinding against wet gravel, its gun lowered, and through the storm, Whitmore saw something that made his stomach tighten. The Germans had brought a third bridging unit. Not pontoons, not canvas spans, a steel girder assault bridge. He whispered, "They're going to try a fast drop." Burke swore under his breath. Fast drop assault bridges required no assembly. Tank-mounted, designed to deploy in seconds, they could span medium gaps with a single metal plank strong enough for armour to cross. If the Panther managed to drop that span over the damaged bridge or directly into the river, they'd have a crossing before the British infantry even reached the woods. "Sir," Burke said, "we can't stop that with pontoons." "No," Whitmore said, staring at the river as if willing it to understand him. "We'll stop it with the river." The Panther advanced another metre. The bridge-laying apparatus unfolded like an insect, unfurling metallic wings. German infantry surged forward to cover it. Whitmore's heartbeat slowed. The anchors were set. The current was shifting. He felt the pressure through the soles of his boots, through the trembling mud, through the sound of the water beginning to roar in a deeper pitch. Burke watched him. "Sir, whenever you're ready." Whitmore gripped the tether line connected to the upriver tensioning system, crude, improvised, dangerously unpredictable. No one in the entire British Army had ever used the river like this. He exhaled. "Now!" He pulled. The anchors released simultaneously. For a moment nothing happened. Then the river lunged. The funnel Whitmore had created forced floodwater into a narrow, high-speed undercurrent that surged diagonally toward the German bank. The surface rippled violently as the hidden wave accelerated beneath it, gathering strength, pulling debris, mud, even broken pontoon frames into its path. The Panther's crew noticed the change too late. The fast-drop bridge extended outward from the tank, its metal spine locking into position, and then the river struck. Not the bank, not the bridge. The Panther. A wall of water surged beneath the surface, erupting upward at the tank's underside with explosive force. The Panther rocked, its treads losing traction on the soaked gravel. The bridge apparatus swung wildly, slamming into the turret. The crew shouted, scrambling inside the steel shell. The tank slid sideways. Burke stared in disbelief. "Sir, it's moving the Panther." But the river wasn't done. The undercurrent slammed the tank again, harder. The Panther lurched, its right tread dipping into the softened bank. Mud gave way beneath 60 tons of steel. The tank's weight began to work against itself, dragging it toward the river like prey caught in a predator's jaws. German infantry shouted, grabbing ropes, trying desperately to anchor the vehicle, but the water caught the ropes too, snapping them taut, yanking soldiers off their feet. Whitmore watched, rain streaming down his face. The Panther tilted, slid. And then, with a grinding metallic cry, it toppled into the river. The fast-drop bridge twisted, snapped, and vanished beneath the churning surface as the tank rolled onto its side. Water swallowed it in seconds. The remaining German soldiers recoiled, terrified. Their assault vehicle was gone. Their bridging attempts had failed 3 times. The river had become an enemy they could not outfight. Slowly, as if collectively acknowledging defeat, the German officers signalled retreat. Infantry began falling back up the eastern road. The Stu G3 reversed with clumsy caution, terrified of the water's reach. Engineers abandoned equipment and tools, leaving them strewn across the mud like broken bones. Burke finally let out a shaky breath. "Sir, I think that's it. They're withdrawing." Whitmore didn't speak at first. He watched the river reclaim its shape, the violent funnel slowly dispersing into the natural current. The anchors were gone, swept downriver. The modified pontoons were in tatters. His trick, the entire system, could not be used again. It had been a one-time answer, a desperate answer. But it had worked. He turned and looked at the British engineers behind him, exhausted, soaked, bruised, but alive. And beyond them, on the far bank, the last of the retreating infantry disappeared into the safety of the woods. He had bought them the time they needed, hours of it. Enough to prevent an entire British flank from collapsing. Enough to save thousands of soldiers from being overrun. Enough to rewrite the next day's battle map. Graves limped up beside him. "Sir, what do we tell command?" Whitmore considered the question. The wind tugged at his coat. The river hissed quietly now, tired from violence. "Tell them," he said softly. "The river fought with us today." Burke smiled faintly. "Sir, they won't believe it." Whitmore finally allowed himself a weary exhale, one that carried 2 hours of terror, improvisation, and genius with it. "They will," he murmured, "when they see the wreckage." The storm eased just slightly then, as though the sky itself understood that the battle was finished. Rain softened, the thunder moved south, mist clung to the shattered bridge remains like a fading memory. The river rolled on, and for the first time that day, Harold Whitmore let himself sit, breathe, and feel the weight of knowing he had turned nature into a weapon, and saved an army with nothing more than pontoons, anchors, and a trick that no manual had ever taught.